everything coming out recently, yeah, all 2 videos, my rated content was through the roof. Came out about 2 weeks later than intended. For the longest time my microphone has been difficult to use. It's a Blue Snowball, and while it looks like a prop Death Star from Spaceballs, it's an okay microphone. Fine enough for me, probably. I've hardly got the ears for audio and sound balance. Could be Stockholm Syndrome. Could be my obsession with keeping things that ain't broke unfixed. Except it wasn't actually unbroke. It's been having some sort of interference issues. Until recently, at least. It's impossible to track down when it started, and I don't even believe it's been a constant, unless through 3 moves or longer I've rolled snake eyes every time I plugged it in. And even if it was popping for the last year or so, I had no chance of realising because of a band-aid called RTX Voice. Noise cancellation is incredible, impressive to a fault, which is why I'm running it even as I speak. But like blasting music because the aircon drone is loud, the underlying flaw hasn't left to go bother someone else. Or in words the kind of people who presumably watch this channel would prefer, it's like having issues with oversteering a powerful rear drive car on corner exit, and instead of focusing on your driving style, investigating how throttle and steering inputs can help, instead you pile on all the understeer you can to make it stable. And yes, to a degree, the changes save some throttle control, but now the car refuses to turn in the first place when it was previously responsive, and because it won't turn, the easy solution is to use more throttle earlier with more steering lock to try and get some rotation. And now your car Beyblades off the apex. Trying to bolt on a fix without knowing the problem is the quickest path to being worse off than before. In my case, it was using noise cancellation because the microphone was crackling like it'd been dunked in a bowl of Rice Krispies. From RTX Voice's perspective, the crackling static was competing with my voice. Sometimes I'd speak and the cancellation will know what to silence, maybe offering an unsubtle hint that chaotic EM fields are about as engaging as my words. But I of all people hate a backseat editor. 90% of a script, sure the audio's fine, but 10% of an unlistenable script is garbage. You can't just dice roll which words are going to make the cut. Some of them might be telling you to subscribe to Boost and Ethanol. I'm still confused that I never did any proper audio testing without the noise cancelling. Maybe other places I've lived at have disguised that the problem was internal, I'm not sure. And there's no obvious cause. The solution was like fixing an NES cartridge. Pull it out, reseat it, and it's all good. Maybe I shook up some ghosts in the cable. But a spiteful mic was only a minor hurdle to getting this thing started in what I'm sort of considering a mini revival of the channel. While it was slowing me down, I'd sort of settled on uploading no matter what, audio quality be damned. And then the fear of keeping this up began. This format nearly died because I started trying to write the script for episode 2 before episode 1 was out. And it's more of a struggle to write 2,000 words without years of race game anger to fall back on. But really, filling a word count is the easiest part of writing. There's always more detail to add. A word maximum is harder to keep to because there's a point where content with actual passion and care put into it has to be left unsaid. So, my fears were entirely unjustified. This script has had so many shelved ideas, I'd just forgotten how to write for a while. Writing lots of words is really easy. This document has 5,500 of them, double my goal and some. But another thing, the initial script wasn't very good. Fortunately, the format had a saviour, me, from about 2 years ago. Usually I consider him as a blithering moron who didn't know what he was doing, getting in the way of future me whose genius is just waiting to be realised. And the tragedy in that piece is that for future me's genius to take place, there has to be a negotiation with the idiot from the past, which is handled by present me, the supremely lazy. Doing this podcast, with the script on my site, forced me to return back there to make sure it's vaguely presentable, which it is, for the most part, if you can look past the URL and the fact WordPress is a garbage website that won't give me enough control over my theme to the point where learning how to make a website from scratch might be better. Look out for that episode in the future. There are a few junk blog posts to hide with shame, but what swept me off my feet was one of the early ones, about racing a Honda NSX in an online league for the first time in GTR 2. That was a surprise, past me to run something genuinely engaging, as naive as he was about racing. Rereading the old posts reminded me of an idea in writing that, due to lack of practice and an outlet to really push myself, I'd forgotten, which is to say ironically, I tend to avoid saying the word I, or any other pronouns at all. If I can avoid using myself to provide a structure for the sentences I am speaking, I consider it better than otherwise. The things discussed should carry themselves. It's awkward to rely on saying I did X, I think Y, I hid the bodies at Z. Initially, the style is odd because it's so natural to fall back on pronouns to carry and start sentences, but actually once it starts flowing, the tactic works far better than coming back to yourself to get going anywhere. I isn't some horrible wrong word to use, just there's a lot of times a sentence can be reworded to be more succinct and entertaining. Coming from writing first-person fiction, using I tends to turn the entire thing into a conveyor belt of plainly stated actions and feelings, with little room for engaging writing. To have confidence to do this requires trusting you, the viewer, to know everything said is always going to be from my own perspective, especially in opinionated stuff like this, so there's no need to remind you that it's just how I feel every time I say something subjective. Every single sentence in these pods could have, in my opinion, stuck on the front like a 2014 F1 nose and be just as palatable to process. That being said, you and I are now going to be hyper aware of every time I say I from now on. Aye? Meanwhile, other pronouns, it being the biggest offender, actually makes more things clear when you write around them. On the 12 millionth rewrite, after my own ideas had sunk into my skull, it became clear that my writing leans on saying it's X, it's Y, and again you get the conveyor belt feeling. So maybe if a sentence isn't gelling quite right, trying to cut out pronouns is a good starting point for making it read better. Or in other words, trying to cut out pronouns is a good starting point if the sentence isn't gelling quite right. Just don't go overboard. For every rule in writing there's at least 10 times as many exceptions. And don't do what I do, you'll never get anything done. It really doesn't matter as much as I'm making out. Case in point. Which brings me nicely onto another piece of motivational advice from one of the writers of The Simpsons. I'd been listening to the commentaries of episodes, and I'd especially recommend the monorail episode. Conan is a gem both in writing and in quipping with other writers. That led me to John Swartzwelder, the longest running writer on The Simpsons and another comedic genius. A private person, he did an interview with The New Yorker a few years ago, and it's well worth reading the entire thing just for how funny it is. But the bit that motivated me through writing what you're hearing was his advice on writing. Put simply, creating something new is harder than pointing out what's wrong. Swartzwelder gets something done first, the roughest, ugliest, most awful but technically complete draft he can rush through. The lines are lazy, simple and robotic. Then he sleeps on it, wakes up, goes, "What idiot wrote this?" gets correcting. Which makes perfect sense. Nobody knows how to make something perfect from scratch. But if you show anyone a completed piece, they can pick holes in it all day long. This strategy is easier said than done. I enjoy pondering how universal our experiences are. We're all unique, but we all trend the same. Everyone has different interests and passions, but the reason for doing them doesn't actually shift about too much. So I'm curious how relatable this will be. In my case, letting something bad flow is difficult, especially making any minor progress is a time sink. The temptation is to make all effort valuable, to maximise my time investment by ignoring things that aren't immediately going well, rather than hacking away with some low quality work until the surface is breached and the rich ideas flow. In the case of writing, well, a few bad words is a relatively low investment. My hands can glide along the keyboard, transferring my thoughts straight to the page one-to-one. Planning is a fairly intertwined process. Even pieces from the rough initial draft can find themselves in the final cut. But the visuals for a video is far more complex. I need to source the material, design it myself, place and sync the visuals in the software, adjust it, review it, adjust it. Doing something bad hurts a lot more when the work feels far larger, so it's tempting to ignore the hang-up and wait for the block to erode naturally. Which it will. It's rarely bad to sleep on an idea when you're stuck, but active exploration is faster. Reviewing my own work is difficult, especially after a while I'm back in the belief that past me is as dumb as the people that don't watch my videos, where maybe I've got an idea and I'd rather write a section again from scratch than try and work new ideas into existing framework. Which is stupid. The time sink is always bigger, but working without other words to maneuver around just feels easier. The worst of all happens when I'm recording, where I'd rather redo an entire script than chop and adjust paragraphs. Currently I'm working on taking one swing at recording, failed at speaking included, to place in the timeline to pick out the worst spots. As it turns out, most verbal stumbles sound completely fine without a sound form on one monitor and a script on the other. The process seems obvious but out in plain, but I can't be the only one like this. Two things make completing a project easy: having passion or having a clear vision of what's going to happen. With a vision, at least I can chug away knowing each step and creative decision will get me to the end, and passion gives strength to grind away against the difficult times when usually I'd rather do something fun. I exclusively work to express my passion. I do what I do because it's fun. Without enjoyment, only a deadline will motivate me. A bit hedonistic, I suppose. There's also an X factor I can't exactly pin down, where even if I've got something on the outside is probably good enough, some sort of disconnect will grind my gears without ever engaging. It's intangible. The most recent example is in my previous video about supercars. That was meant to come out 2 weeks earlier, but between a lack of ideas for visuals and a lack of confidence in the content, it sat on my hard drive as I'll get back to it later. The missing detail was that the team suggested the droop of the suspension to purposely make the car tripod on the corner entry. I didn't discover that until the itch to make forced my lethargic hands to scratch, and when I got back into the swing of working, doing a bit of research, digging about for visuals, everything clicked, and after a day or two of high energy, productive work, it was out. There's a similar story with this very episode. My upload schedule tells you my work ethic is loose and inconsistent. The fact is, just opening a file and devoting a bit of brain power to working takes way more effort than burning a night on the convenient dopamine machine in our pockets. And then there's other familiar tasks we can easily do. I go to sit at my computer to edit a video, but Steam opens quicker than my editing software. And then I think, well, 15 minutes of gaming just to loosen up won't hurt. 15 becomes 30, becomes 60, becomes exponential. Or what about if I've got a stuffy nose that makes run-on sentences difficult to speak without gasping for air? Then I guess I'll do it tomorrow. Excuses like AK-47s, cheap, plentiful, and perfect for holding off motivation to take part in capitalism. But like I said last episode, badly done to get started it is more productive than waiting for perfect conditions. I could do a read of a script with awful audio to use as a baseline for editing, I just don't want to. But if I did have that crappy read, then there's a foundation to lay some visuals out and sketch the beginning of the video and build momentum. Unless I'm really lost for ideas, the ball will then keep rolling until fatigue overtakes it. It's just about summoning the courage to say screw it and keep moving. It's not just videos that get lost waiting for the right time. Most of anything that isn't an immediate spur-of-the-moment passion project finds itself on some kind of back burner. My work at uni, writing, game development, hell, even reading or watching shows because I'm not in the mood. Although, for balance, let's remember that not all creation is equal. The act of writing isn't the same sort of investment as video editing. I've written a lot, not a day goes by where I don't use words in some way. The bar for entry is pretty low, word processors are on every single device, and if not, a pen and paper will do. Pretty much every other type of creation requires some sort of specialised equipment to maximise the output. There's a lot less work you can do on editing a video without access to software, and I'd like to see you try painting without paints in a canvas. In fact, physical media is a lot harder to justify making crappy, just get stuck in type pieces. I 3D print a lot, and with all the grams of plastic used up testing settings or printing throwaway pieces to make sure it's running smoothly, there's some level of hesitation every time I press start, even though it costs pennies and probably works out both cheaper and less wasteful in the long run. Could that process be justified with expensive paints? I think so. Make crappy, rushed first drafts where we forget to press backspace and don't erase the sketch lines or use placeholder text where the important quote should go. Waste your nice equipment on things that never see the light of day rather than letting them sit on the shelf for the right time. Chase the mood, don't wait for the mood to come to you. That's the message, mostly spelt out for myself. And before I go, just one thing. I'm going to allow myself to overstep the arbitrary word limit to give some shoutouts to cool media and inspiration to me. Super Woden GP2 came out recently, and while top-down races are a sin, there is no sane way to write off a game with so much soul and passion and general fun. Lots of people rush to talk about the nostalgia, and while there's a lot of elements of existing games into one beautiful homage, it's so much more than that. It stands up on its own, the driving is fun once you figure out how to handle the top-down perspective, the rally mode is a particular highlight, the variety and details are great, it's just a very solid, good game I have to pace myself with because of how it devours my free time. And it's made by one person, so all the more reason to hype it up. And while you're enjoying a game with an AW11 MR2 as a starter car, go and watch the stuff on Second Wind's YouTube channel. I can attest that their content is somehow even better than back on The Escapist. If you somehow missed the drama, the parent company The Escapist, a website and YouTube channel, home of Zero Punctuation and a lot of other brilliant series, decided to fire their editor-in-chief. In response, pretty much all the video side of The Escapist resigned and went independent to Second Wind. There's so many great people there if you're into games, it's just generally funny and insightful writing. I don't like to worship people, it's boring to talk about things exclusively in the context of another person, but Yahtzee and his Dev Diary series was a serious bit of inspiration for me to do both game development and this podcast format, and in general it's one of the best series on YouTube. Binge it all if you've still got laundry to do after this, and again, go buy Super Woden GP2. Hope your washing machine is loaded, subscribe to Boost and Ethanol, and goodbye.